I am Kelly Fordon, and I'm here today with Maura Stanton. And we are going to be talking about her story, School for Robots, which was the winner of the Spring 2025 Ghost Story Supernatural Fiction Award. Maura is the winner of the 1975 Yale Younger Poets Award, the 2003 Michigan Literary Award, and 2 NEA fellowships. Maura Stanton has published 5 books of poems: Snow on Snow, Cries of Swimmers, Tales of the Supernatural, Life Among the Trolls, and Glacier Wine, 3 short story collections, The Country I Come From, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, and Cities in the Sea, and 1 novel, Molly Companion. Her work has appeared in a number of publications, including The Best American Poetry, Third Coast, Plowshares, Tri-Quarterly, The New Yorker, the Antioch Review, the Paris Review, the Chicago Review, and River Styx. Welcome, Maura. I always start with kind of the same question for everybody, which is what was the impetus for this story? And I know you've written many stories about robots and the supernatural, and I'm just kind of curious about that whole collection that you're working on as well.
Well, I guess I started with a story back in 2016, and I was trying to find a voice to write in. And all of a sudden I had this voice, and she seemed to be a robot, and she was talking to me and telling me about her life. And she was a robot who had been bought to be a nanny for a family. So that story ended up being called Miss Air, and she was the first robot story I wrote. And after that, I just started approaching robots from different angles. Sometimes the robots speaking, sometimes people who own the robots or had bought the robots, or people who were just friends of the robots who encountered them here and there. So I was just kind of coming at it in different ways. And I just found it a really rich thing to work in. I was just kind of excited about it for a while. And that's when a School for Robots came in about 2 years later, about 2018 or so. And I had been taking some painting classes down at the junior college, some oil painting classes. And I was just struck by the difference between this messy workroom with these easels and the smell of solvents and paint and dirty rags and brushes all over the place, and then how clean the world of the computer seemed to be in contrast. So that kind of struck me, and I wondered what people who were working in that kind of environment would feel if they were being sort of pushed out by the coming sort of computer revolution, which seemed to be affecting painting and all of the arts at the same time. So that's kind of what the impetus behind it was.
And did you have to do a lot of research into the world of AI and robots, or did you just...
I did no research. Just stories that would come up on the news, nothing more than that. The rest of it I just sort of invented as I went along, sort of invented my own world and sort of my own vocabulary occasionally, but I tried to keep it simple and accessible. And it just seemed to me that all of us were sort of robots inside, and that robots could easily become us once they get more sophisticated. So I didn't see much distinction between the robot people and the so-called real people as I was writing the stories. And that was a lot of fun.
I mean, that's fascinating to me because I'm always worried as a writer that there's some nuance that I'm not going to get about a certain, if I write about, I don't know, sailing or whatever, that I don't have the expertise to actually really delve into that. But somehow you were able to manage it, that it was simple and straightforward, and yet it seemed so believable.
Yeah, it's also a fantasy world. My robots are fantasy. So if I were writing about sailing, I would have no clue. I would have to do an enormous amount of research because that's real. My robots are sort of on the edge between fantasy and realism. We're right now on the cusp of that. So that allowed me a lot of freedom. I could sort of do what I wanted with my robots.
Yeah.
Make them into anything.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future, there won't be that much freedom once the robots are sort of established the way computers are now established. Remember years ago when computers were these big clunky machines that had green typeface, and they would just feel very frustrating and very unworkable. And now they're really sleek and easy to handle, except when it comes to Zoom meetings occasionally.
Yeah, no, that's so true because we didn't know what they could do at the time. We didn't
No.
know what they were capable
Mhm.
of, so that was a whole world that was open. That makes sense. So these two main characters, Ray and Stella, they're two former art teachers. They lose their jobs to automation, and I was wondering about when you started creating the story, what came to you first about Ray and Stella in particular? I know they have the neighbors who are 20 years older than them who are retiring. So this isn't as much of a problem in their world, but I'm curious about Ray and Stella as people for you.
Well, they're probably prototypes of myself and my husband, who's also a writer and a teacher, and our relationship to our universities, which are increasingly becoming more business-like. I would say that the business school is pretty much taking over the university. And so the people who are in the arts, who are in the liberal arts, painting, English, history, are feeling kind of pushed aside as that aspect of university takes over with more and more vice presidents and more deans, fewer teachers, more emphasis on computers and the like, fewer English majors, more business majors. So I think that was maybe in the background. And then, of course, I was taking the painting classes. So I was running into people who are working with their hands, getting dirty, as opposed to people who were like sitting at computers all day. And I was kind of interested in that contrast.
And I'm curious if you talk to anybody in those art classes about what they think the future will hold for them as things get
Um,
automated.
no, we never talk in those art classes, really. We just kind of move on with our painting. And that's what I liked about it, too. There was not a lot of theory involved, it was just
Hmm.
kind of doing things. And I tend to be a pretty low tech person myself. Like, I only use my phone for getting coupons from Kroger. And that's about it.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't really think that much about it, except sort of as I wrote the stories in a fantasy sort of sense.
So it seems like like Stella and Ray have two different roles in the story. For instance, like Stella is going to jump on board and she's going to try and become an entrepreneur and start the school for robots. And Ray seems more like he would put his head in the sand if he had a chance and just ignore, everything that's happening. And is that kind of how you saw them? Like she's going to just try and make something of the it kind of reminded me of anybody in the arts who's trying to be entrepreneurial and make a little bit of money and survive. But I wonder at what cost. And I just wondered what you thought of the two of them as a couple
Yeah,
under the
I think that's true. Like, she wants to push ahead. She would probably set up her Facebook page, and she would do everything she could to kind of push in that direction. Whereas he just wants to turn away from that and kind of do his own stuff. But he's too depressed to do his own stuff because he feels he's being pushed out a little bit by all of the activity that's going on around him, or the new world that seems to be that he's now living in. He feels that he's not sure if he's in the past or the future. You know, he sees the past inside the future and the future inside the past. So he's kind of got to come to terms with that.
Mhm.
Probably most like me, I would say.
Yeah, I just wonder, I mean, this is sort of not off the topic, but it made me think a lot about like what do you do with all that creativity when you don't know when there's no point to it or like now there are so many literary magazines and it's harder to get published and so many people are writing and maybe some are utilizing AI and we don't even know. But I just was curious, like what will be their psychological state or the psychological state of all artists during this period? What do you do with that creativity?
Yeah, I think you just have to keep writing, keep pushing forward, and try not to think about it too much. Just focus on your own work. That's what I sort of learned to do in the painting class, and I like the way that that sort of carried through to my own writing.
Mhm.
I'm never going to be Rembrandt or Sargent. I'm just painting these pictures and getting involved in it and really trying to solve problems inside the painting. And that's really sort of what I do with writing too. I just kind of focus on my own work and don't think too much about who's going to be reading it or if it'll ever get published or, just
Mhm.
sort of go with that.
Did it take you a while to get to that stage?
No, I think I've always sort of had to be like that. So it's sort of a natural position to be in, although I do think about it at times a little bit more. Occasionally I'll get depressed and have to think, well, no, that doesn't matter. Just go ahead with what you're doing.
Mhm.
And if it's good, it'll find a reader. And if it isn't good, then you'll just write another one and that'll find a reader.
That's a great attitude. I like that. So you have the structure within the story of the different sections. And I was curious how that came to you, like with the graduation. I mean, that's one of the last ones. I'm trying to find my list here. Somehow I have misplaced it. Oh, the role playing, the Knights of Old, analysis, Stella gets to work, our first pupil, Kevin, depression, role playing, Knights of Old, analysis, graduation. What function were those sections serving for you in the story?
I think they helped me push the plot along, push the conflict along. By kind of naming each little section, I could focus on a small part of the story and sort of work that up and then move on to the next part and the next part. I also I wanted to make all these robot stories sort of different from each other. So I've always been looking for different structures, different ways of telling them. And this seemed like an interesting way to do it with this small little pieces with a little title for each piece. And it sort of added, I thought, to the humor of the story too. That's another thing. I wanted to make sure that the story, even though it's serious, is also funny at the same time.
So where does this story fall in the series? Like, which one did you write first, or is this like number 4, or how many have you written total?
I've written about 10 or 12. I have about a book of robot stories, and this one came somewhere in the middle, I would say. I've got robot story. I have a robot ballerina, and I've got a robot who works at Amazon, and he was doing that years ago before they began replacing more and more humans with their robots. And I have a robot who is being recycled, and I have a robot who goes out to Kansas and runs into the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy and people
I'm,
like that. So
yep.
it's fun I can do I have a haunted robot factory, so I can do all kinds of crazy things with it. And the book could probably be arranged in different ways. But this, in terms of writing, I think this one came about 4th or 5th story.
So it's interesting that, is that how you work? You follow an obsession or something takes your interest, like say robots, and then you just keep going until you.
Yeah, I think so, because I wrote a whole bunch of stories set in Venice, Italy. So I was approaching Venice from all kinds of different angles and trying different kinds of forms. And then I kind of reached a point where I'd written too many Venice stories, that was enough. And that's when I started writing the robot stories.
Okay.
So I'm kind of finished with the robot stories now and searching around for somewhere else to go.
Is it going to come out in a short story collection? Are you shopping it?
I would love that, but no, I'm just still sending it around to contests. So
Okay.
maybe someday, but not at the moment. The Venice stories will be published by Slant Books in a couple of years. So I finally got that one taken. But this may take a while, the robots, but
I doubt it. I doubt it. Okay, so we've got the different robots in the story. First of all, my favorite was Boris's. The teenager Boris has his sidekick robot who like enables him to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And
in a college town.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an utter disaster because I have 4 kids, so I can't imagine. But then there is Kevin, who is the replacement son for the Slaters, who lost their son. And then there's Jacqueline, and she is with this couple who won't even get her anything decent to wear. They just have her in this old terry cloth jumpsuit. So when you were thinking about the different robots in this particular story, were you just having them fulfill different roles that you imagined people might need them for?
I was thinking along those terms. So you might want a companion robot, a robot as a friend. Someone might give you a robot as a gift. And what would you do with that, especially if you didn't really want a robot? You might want a robot to replace a family member. Yeah, I was trying to think of different functions that robots might play.
Mm-hmm. The nanny robot, yeah.
They just had a story on the BBC today about robots being used in a care home in Japan, and they invented all these different types of robots that could be used for this and that purpose to take care of the older people in the home. But after a few weeks, the people who worked there, and the robots were supposed to maybe help replace them because they were having trouble getting care workers. But the people who worked there began to hate the robots because they had to maintain them. They had to constantly wash them and repair them and take care of them. And so they were using them less and less, and they're actually taking up time away from their duties to their patients rather than helping them with the patients. So I thought that was kind of
That
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of FX, the waiter robot in your
Yeah,
story, and how the chef says, "Well, he's never going to call off work. I just have to deal with if he breaks." And I assume
yeah,
that you would become outmoded. You would have to have all sorts of care. And then maybe, if you malfunction and forget everything, then you have to be retrained. So there are
yeah,
a lot of issues.
yeah, yeah. I imagine that they'll solve all these issues in the future, but it'll be a while. There'll be clunky versions of robots in the meantime.
Yeah. When you were thinking of Jacqueline in particular, or well, just the school for robots, I guess, and what they were trying to teach them about, sympathizing and empathy and all the human emotions and when to push the button for your cry tear. And, I guess we have no idea right now how much they're going to emulate our behavior or become human. But as you're writing more and more of these stories, are you getting a feel for what you think might happen in the world with robots? I mean, any sort of sense of how human they could become?
I think they could become quite human. I mean, because if we're modeling them on ourselves, we're going to make them more and more like ourselves. And maybe they won't feel real emotions, but they'll certainly be able to simulate real emotions, and we might not be able to tell the difference.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I feel writing them. Humans have robotic qualities themselves, and so why shouldn't robots have human qualities eventually when we can, reach that point technologically?
Hmm. Yeah, there's an element, and I don't quite know how to phrase this, but like to storytelling that if you hit sort of, for like Freytag's pyramid, if you hit all the major points, right, it is sort of like you're sending out a signal of some sort to humans, and humans will react in a certain way given if you hit certain beats. And it's almost like you're pressing on the buttons of a human when you're telling a story. And if you hit the right beats, you get the reaction that you're looking for. There's some way in which we're all programmed in a way to respond to certain things.
Even though we're trying to create creatures that are made of patterns and algorithms.
Hmm. Yeah. What about painting with algorithms? You mentioned that.
Well, you can look up algorithmic art, and there's a Wikipedia article about it. Art can be created through design, through recipes, using parameters and computer code. And the AI can create paintings based on, say, Cézanne or Sargent. So, yeah, it's definitely there. I mean, art can be created digitally, and there are artists who are digital artists who are out there now creating things that are made on the computer that can be then be printed off. So it's definitely out there.
Hmm. And what do you think is lost in that situation? Like, what do you think a class like that would be like?
About art is the messiness of it, just throwing yourself in there using your hands, getting paint all over you, wearing some dirty clothes. I like doing it, the whole process of doing it, and the smell of the paint. So I wouldn't be interested in doing things algorithmically, but there are artists, who do that. That's how they see the world, and they can do paintings on iPads and create really beautiful things electronically or through, I guess, algorithms or whatever. I don't exactly know what I'm talking about when I say an
No,
algorithm. It's
yeah.
vague, but you hear it all of the time. But no, they do some gorgeous stuff. And there's the other kind of art, which is, the hands-on sort of art, which is the opposite of sitting at a computer screen or manipulating a mouse or manipulating your finger on a screen. They exist side by side. I think that the future and the past are just, both here in the present, and we have to sort of choose what we want to emphasize or what direction we want to go. But they're all moving forward, moving backward, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's sort of like an industrial revolution moment, but this is the obviously IT moment or the robot moment. Like right before there won't be those choices. Like the next generation will have even fewer choices. There'll be fewer people maybe reading actual books in the next generation. It's sort of a novelty now, if people are reading an actual holding a tangible book.
Right.
Although I can see the possibilities of if you working with AI a lot. My son is a coder, and you can get a lot of information right off the bat, and then maybe move to the next level of thinking because you don't have to do all of the groundwork. I think that's the way he sees it. Maybe people in my generation or, our generation will think it's laziness to skip all of those other steps and move on to like a higher realm. But he sort of thinks that they're doing the legwork for him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. But I don't know which will win out. I don't know. I don't know if it'll be a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, let's talk about the owners really quickly. The different ways they treat the robots sort of reminded me of the way you would treat, honestly, it was like they had slaves, and the Slaters view Jacqueline as property. Kevin is a clone. FX is simply a worker. And I wondered if that will become an ethical dilemma in the future if humans are no longer useful, what will be the use of humanity at all? And then also, but if you can treat these objects, if you are simultaneously teaching them to have feelings, and to interact like humans, and yet you feel like you don't have to treat them well, I wonder if that will also become a dilemma as they begin to, I don't know if they begin to become cognizant or...
If they could become cognizant, it would definitely be a dilemma for the future. Yeah, to create these kind of look-alike people and then not treat them like real people. They matured into humans, then there could be some problems. Alexa, turn off the lights. When you're in somebody's house who has an Alexa, to do that. It sounds kind of mean sometimes. Alexa, do this. Alexa, what time is it? Alexa, what's the temperature out there? It sounds kind of mean, and then this little voice speaks up. Oh, it's 79 degrees.
And then if you say anything really rude to Alexa, she'll say, "I cannot respond to that," or or that. Yeah, it's just bizarre. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you've had teenagers around an Alexa, it's a really snarky situation.
Oh, yeah, that could be really funny. Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
what I mainly wanted to do with my robot is just write some comic stories about what could happen with different types of robots and countering different kinds of people and different kinds of situations. So I really had a lot of fun with them. I think that comedy is kind of tricky, and I know I had some trouble with some of the stories going back and forth between being serious or being really funny. Some tend to be more serious than others, and I tend to like the comic ones. I like comedy and in fiction, and
yeah, I do too.
I like to play around with it, and I also like a little fantasy in fiction too.
Yeah,
But I like realism, so I kind of go back and forth. When I started writing, metafiction was really dominant. Like when I was at Iowa years ago, metafiction was the main type of fiction. And it wasn't until I got out to California in the 70s to teach at Humboldt State, where Dick Day, who was the professor there at Humboldt State, gave me a copy of Raymond Carver's stories, and I read Raymond Carver for the first time. And he happened to be out there at the same time, so I got to know him a little bit. So he was the one who radically could have changed my fiction and got me back interested in writing short stories again. And so I think that there's a little bit of Raymond Carver that runs through all of my work.
And what was his advice? I'm curious. Like, do you remember some things that...
Give me advice so much. I just loved his fiction. I just loved the way he wasn't writing the metafiction like everyone else was writing, like I was writing. And I'd gotten kind of discouraged about writing this kind of fiction about fiction. But he seemed to be able to write about people in the real world, and yet there was always this kind of abstract element to it at the same time. So he was abstracting the real world and turning it into sort of a piece of art. So I just really admired him for that. And I think he got me really started back into writing fiction again when I moved out of it. That was like in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. Wow, that must have been amazing. Let me just pause for a second and ask Paul if he has any questions. I went a little longer than I thought I was going to.
Well, I do, but it's not so much about the story itself, but just the overarching framework of imbuing the mechanical with the full qualities of humans. I was really interested when you talked about how you did the art, the messiness of it, the involvement of all the five senses, of something that's inside that's creative. I don't think we can give any machine that. And I'm just wondering what your take is. Both of you referred to the robot inside of us, and I find myself resistant to that notion because it's an objectification of ourselves that's true in part because we take it on as part of our creativity in order to resolve issues for ourselves, to become comfortable. I'm just wondering what your response to that would be.
That sounds like a good explanation of it, that we take it on ourselves. If there weren't robots out there, we wouldn't think of ourselves as robots. If there weren't monsters out there, we wouldn't think of ourselves as monsters. So I think we look out at the world and we see what's out there and we pull it into our own psyche. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Well, every machine is something a human being has created as a simulation of something we want done, right? That there are things that do work. And I just think human beings are more than things that do work. We're so in the water, we're the fish in the water, where everything is something mechanically manipulated. And yet there's, as we all know, there's so much more. And I just don't think a machine can fully embody that.
Well, let's hope so. I agree. I would hope that that's the case. I hope that that's the future too, that there'll always be something in us that can't go into it.
I hope so too. But it is, it's hard to know because a lot of time, I mean, I haven't done this, but I know my sons, they're on Chat GPT and you can have long conversations with Chat GPT about a lot of things. And they just keep getting more and more sophisticated as they're gathering information from all over the internet. And it's very nuanced. I don't think they'll ever be able to do it, but I wonder if they'll be able to fool especially younger people whose brains are still forming, who haven't had that many, human interactions yet. That's what really frightens me.
Yeah, that could well be the case. Well, I'm ignoring the Chat GPT and I'm just sticking with Google. Just
Yeah.
Google thing. It makes life simpler.
It does
Bring up
make life.
new web pages.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
One last question about
kids,
this.
that's different. Yeah.
The kids, they're doing everything, which is
Yeah.
really scary.
Right.
Okay, one last question about Kevin and Jacqueline. At the end of the story, they take off together. Is there a story in the collection, or have you at all thought about like what might have happened to the two of them after they leave everyone behind and take off together?
No, because I don't want to think about it. I just like that moment when they take off. Everybody's watching them and rooting for them. Even the school owners who know that this is probably the end of things. Just that moment where they become human. I mean, they really step out of their role as robots and they become us, making a mutual decision to choose love or connection over the demands that are being made on them. So that's a human moment in the story. And I really didn't expect that to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end, but when it did, it just felt really, really right. So I don't want to think about what's going to happen tomorrow when that air scooter runs out of gas or they call the police or they pull their drag back to their owners. I don't want to think about that. I just want that moment to exist in time.
Yeah, like a beautiful robot love story. And so you said you're finished with this collection, you're finished with the robot stories. What are you working on now?
I started writing, I write poetry as well as fiction. So
I'm aware. It's amazing poetry.
Last year I was only writing poetry, but this fall I started writing stories again. And I've been writing more realistic stories set in Rockport, Massachusetts, which is a little seaside artist colony in Massachusetts where I've spent 3 nights in my whole life. But for some reason, it's generating stories for me. And I'm setting them there and inviting some people to live in that little town north of Boston.
And is that how your process works? I'm just curious because you're both a fiction writer and a poet. Are you just drawn to poetry and you'll spend a year or so writing poetry and then you switch back to fiction, or how does that work for you?
Usually in the past, I would write poetry sort of during the school year when I was teaching, and then I would write fiction in the summer when I had more time. But now that I'm retired, I have more time all the time. So I find that I'll work on poetry for a while and then kind of drop it and then sort of move slowly back into fiction and then have a sense that I'll write several stories and then I'll probably be going back into poetry. So it's not as mechanical as it was when I was teaching and had, school year, summer, school year, summer. Now I have all the time and I can just sort of let it flow more organically. But my plan this time is to write 5 stories and then in January start writing poetry again. And then maybe next fall write some more stories to maybe fit into the same arc or not, depending.
And do you usually stick with the plan when you make a plan?
No, not always.
I was just curious because I've made those plans before and I just wanted to know. Yeah.
It evolves. I have no idea what's really going to happen.
Okay. And also, I just wanted to tell you before we leave that we also did a series on the sea fairies, your story, The Sea Fairies, on the Substack. And I was for a very long time obsessed with that story. I think it is like one of the most amazing stories. I
Yeah.
think about it all the time. I hope people will read that one too.
Yeah. That was my favorite book when I was a kid, The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum.
And he's in another one of the one about the Tin Man. I read the robot story about the Tin Man as well. Yeah.
Right.
And the Wizard of Oz is in that. Yeah.
When they go to Kansas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, the fantasy stories or the fantasy literature has really kind of got into me, and it comes out in odd places, and I never know when it's going to show up.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. We really appreciate you spending time with us.